I just wanted to make a quick video dissecting a point that's often made here on this channel about selective service. And it's made by all sorts of people, but tradcons specifically, who often put their talk of freedom and liberty and even their non-aggression principle in some cases on the back burner whenever this topic of selective service comes up. Now, again, we saw Phyllis Schlafly bring down the Equal Rights Amendment, mainly citing that it wouldn't give women any extra rights they already didn't currently hold and would saddle them with responsibilities they didn't want potentially. And mainly, according to her, these responsibilities were the ability to be enlisted in the draft via selective service. So, keeping that in mind, let's talk briefly about the argument being made that I see every time I post a video about this topic, and I'm going to refute it here based first and foremost on a moral basis. Now, saying, and I've talked about this before, but saying that only men should be required to fill out a selective service card in order for the privilege, and yes, it's a privilege to vote, not a right, for men at least, anyway, since women are born with the right to vote according to our society. There is no condition at any age placed on women by our society that revokes their right to vote if they fail to meet that condition. Again, I believe that rights are survival strategies that human beings have invented and not conferred to us by any sort of mysticism or God or nature or otherwise. But women are born, according to our society, with the right to vote. Men have to earn it by signing a document of potential conscription and military service to earn their right to vote. So again, voting is a privilege for men and a right for women. And saying that men should be required to fill out a selective service card as a precondition to the privilege of voting should be absolutely rejected and resisted by men and by anyone who purports to be for the rights and freedoms of men. And frankly, the only reason this is even allowed is because it's men who are bearing the brunt of this injustice, and as such, nobody cares. Not women, and especially not men, who, as we all know, are often all too glad to beg for their own exploitation and degradation. But it becomes crystal clear just how immoral and evil selective service is when we replace men with race or men with women. Let's take the example of race. Let's say that it was determined that on average, race A was better at military combat than race B. Let's say it was discovered that on average, race A performed better in naval combat, hand-to-hand combat, aerial combat, etc. Is it then right to encode into law that we should force race A to be disenfranchised on the condition that to earn their vote, they have to sign up for a registry that says the government will compile a list of your people and your race just in case we need to forcibly draft you? Then imagine that the racial equivalent of Phyllis Schlafly on national television, after spearheading an effort to stop an amendment to the Constitution that says the government can make no law that gives preferential treatment based on race to race A or B. Imagine then if Phyllis Schlafly's racial equivalent got on national television and said that the reason they stopped the amendment from becoming a reality is because race B wouldn't gain any rights or privilege they didn't already have, and race A is better at soldiering anyway. That sounds extremely racist, doesn't it? It sounds like a borderline advocation of genocide against race A, doesn't it? I don't want my race to have to fight and die for this country. Let those filthy A's do it. But don't you dare take away race B's right to vote. And this, of course, would lead directly to more death and misery and suffering for the people of race A. And this is exactly what selective service is doing, with the only difference being that instead of race, it's gender, the male gender. Another example. Let's say that tomorrow, some children of men scenario renders women unable to reproduce. Some strain of influenza we can't vaccinate against causes mass infertility. I know it's highly unlikely, but let's just pretend. It's certainly not outside the realm of possibility, so just imagine this scenario happened. Now, the first thing that virologists would do is to find out what exactly is causing the infertility in the first place. Is it men whose sperm could no longer inseminate a female egg, or is it the female egg that could no longer accept viable sperm? And let's say that after a few decades or even a century of research, it was discovered that the now long burned out influenza strain that caused this rendered the female egg incapable of being fertilized by human sperm. And let's say that it was finally discovered that simple gene therapy or some other fix was discovered that would reverse the infertility the virus had caused. Now, if it had been a century before this was discovered, I'd imagine that after several generations without reproduction, the human species would be in dire need of replenishing its numbers. And the few women that remain of childbearing age would have the responsibility of repopulating our species. Let's say then that a form of selective service was then put into place for the purposes of forcing these childbearing women against their will to be impregnated multiple times, and the only excuse given to justify it is, well, we need women for reproduction. Women are better at reproducing, so they shouldn't be able to vote unless they reproduce. And so this would be an advocation of mass rape and coercion, wouldn't it? This would be highly immoral, and frankly, it would be disgusting. And yet, we do worse to men by telling them that they might have to fight and die, not just be impregnated against their will. They might have to fight and die or be imprisoned, all after they've been disenfranchised. Because you see, the fact is that out in the open, discrimination against men is such a fact of life that it's just camouflaged and deeply embedded into our society. We don't even see it anymore. When we bring up the sinking of the Titanic, I've seen these types, tradcon types, actually have the gall to explain this away, to explain away the fact that many more men and even more children perish in comparison to women, because women, and this is how they justified it, women, according to them, are inherently more valuable in our species because of the fact that they possess a uterus. That was their explanation. And this is an explanation that falls apart when you take into account that postmenopausal women still enjoy the same privileges and benefits that men don't. Why weren't elderly women sent to their watery graves in greater numbers than young men in the prime of their lives? Why were more elderly women not sacrificed in hopes of at least saving more children? Now, when dealing with military service and women and men, you have to explore the inherent greater strength and physical capability of men in comparison to women. So with that said, let's think back to the invasion of Normandy on Omaha Beach and, the hell on earth that men of the Allied forces went through. So I read somewhere, I'll see if I can dig up the link, but I read somewhere that the average age was somewhere around 22, and the average weight was somewhere around 144 pounds for your average Allied soldier. And so these men of this stature were tossed off of amphibious transports, literally into a wall of bullets and blood and mortar and shrapnel flying around at the speed of sound. These men were human shields. They were war fodder, that's it. And no amount of difference between men and women, physically speaking, was going to change this crushing fact that all of the men on there, many of whom had been drafted, were potentially running into their demise, their own deaths. Cannon fodder doesn't have to be skilled at warfare. They just have to die. They just have to eat bullets and die. How much better were these men prepared for the wall of death and destruction they were dropped into than women were really? When you're pushed into a wall of death with metal flying around at the speed of sound all around you, it boils down to luck. It boils down to hoping you're not part of the slaughter. That's it. Women can be used as useless cannon fodder just as easily as men can. They aren't, because they're viewed by both men and women as life forms of higher value than men. It isn't about physical differences between men and women. It's about the fact that society and most men and most women view women as higher life forms than you. Now, even still, admittedly, women are the inferior soldiers without a doubt. That's a biological reality that I don't deny. But what happens when, for example, exoskeletons, which are already a reality, by the way, they already exist. What happens when soldiers are beginning to be outfitted with these exoskeletons in warfare, which render the physical differences between men and women essentially obsolete? We're still going to develop methods by which women are shielded by the danger of warfare anyway. We'll still put more men at risk anyway, because it's not about men being better soldiers, you see. Again, it's about male life being seen by our society as disposable trash that can be thrown away. And it's about the fact that for all our brilliance, men are too damn stubborn and too stupid to say enough is enough. We don't want to be society's pincushion anymore. And call me a misandrist if you want. Yeah, I hate men because I'm calling you stupid for letting society use and abuse you. Let me ask you, men, do you think that the way things are today is healthy? Do you think this is healthy? Do you think that feminists and traditionalist women, the attitude they have towards you, do you think that the way women see you is healthy? Do you think it's healthy that being manly, according to society, means enduring hardships that half the human species isn't expected to? Do you think that's a healthy way for your sons to grow up? Are you tired of women always having an excuse for their laziness and selfish attitudes towards men, and men always being happy to jump the mental gymnastics required to believe this horse shit? Are you tired of women coasting through life on the hard work of men, and any demand that they carry their own damn weight being met with some version of, well, if we leave it to the women, we know it won't get done, so men might as well do it? You know what happens if I go into work and leave my assigned job to other people, and my response when my boss confronts me is well, so-and-so is better at my job anyway? I get fired. I'm not allowed to participate in the workforce with that kind of lazy, good-for-nothing attitude. Stop making excuses, men. Stop allowing this shit. Think of your sons growing up to be trained to believe themselves to be nothing but tools for the appeasement of women and the state. Wake the fuck up. Now, some say that this issue is irrelevant, because right now there's no draft. To me, this is the same issue as saying the NSA spying on American citizens isn't relevant because they haven't weaponized or used their invasion of privacy on any large scale against us yet. And yet you'd be stupid not to fear the fact that if they want to, they can. They haven't forced us into the draft using data compiled via Selective service yet, but if they want to, they can. Talking about the hypocrisy of the Selective service program, getting it revoked is important for the exact same reason that it was important to get white and colored only water fountains removed from government facilities, because we will not tolerate, we should not tolerate being told by our government that we are second-class work and cannon fodder in comparison to women. Understand the importance of symbolism here. Every threat of enslavement, every demotion of a group of people to subhuman status in history has been followed first with a threat, either stated or implied, of the intent to enslave. And I hear that threat loud and clear, gentlemen. Understand silent war or become its victim. So I ask you, are you a human being? Or are you a tool of warfare to be moved around like some pawn on a chess set? Are you a human being, or are you a beast of burden designed for the expendable whims of a gynocentric system? I know what I am, and I'll not be led to slaughter by some Judas goat tradcon misandrist, or the female collective, or feminists, or the state. That's all I gotta say for now. Thanks for listening.